Picture this, it's 1789, and the most magnificent palace in Europe reeks of corruption while its gardens bloom with imported tulips costing more than a peasant's yearly wage. Welcome to France on the eve of revolution, a powder keg of inequality where silk-clad nobles dance in gilded halls while outside, mothers clutch dying children, their stomachs bloated from eating sawdust bread. This is the story of how an entire civilization collapsed in just 10 years. How a kingdom that had ruled for over 1,000 years was torn apart by its own people. How the elegant world of powdered wigs and court etiquette gave way to the thunder of guillotines and the screams of the condemned. The French Revolution wasn't just a political upheaval, it was a human earthquake that shattered every assumption about power, privilege, and what it means to be free. By the time the smoke cleared, hundreds of thousands would be dead, a king and queen would lose their heads, and the very concept of revolution would be forever changed. This is the story of how ordinary people became extraordinary monsters and extraordinary heroes. To understand the explosion, we must first understand the pressure building beneath France's glittering surface. Imagine a society so rigid that your birth determined not just your wealth, but whether you paid taxes at all. The first estate, the clergy, owned 10% of France's land but paid nothing to the crown. The second estate, the nobility, controlled another 20%, also tax-exempt. That left everyone else, the third estate, 98% of France's population, to shoulder the entire burden of a bankrupt kingdom. But the economic crisis was just gasoline on an already smoldering fire. France had spent itself into oblivion fighting wars across the globe, including bankrolling America's own revolution against Britain. The bitter irony. France helped birth American liberty while its own people starved under absolute monarchy. Meanwhile, dangerous ideas were spreading through the salons of Paris like a plague among the privileged. Voltaire questioned divine right. Rousseau proclaimed that man was born free but everywhere lived in chains. The American Declaration of Independence wasn't just ink on parchment, it was proof that kings could be overthrown and republics could flourish. When King Louis XVI, weak and indecisive, finally convened the Estates General in May 1789, the first time in 175 years, he thought he was solving a budget crisis. Instead, he was lighting the fuse on a bomb that would consume his world. June 20, 1789. Picture this moment, representatives of the Third Estate, locked out of their meeting hall by royal guards, gather instead in an indoor tennis court. There, with rain hammering the windows, they take an oath that would echo through history: they will not disband until France has a new constitution. The tennis court oath wasn't just political theater, it was a declaration of war against 1,000 years of absolute rule. But it was July 14th that gave the revolution its symbol of fury. The Bastille fortress loomed over Paris like a stone monster, its walls hiding political prisoners and, more importantly, gunpowder desperately needed by the people. What began as a search for ammunition became something far more powerful: the symbolic destruction of royal oppression. As the fortress fell and the governor's head was paraded through the streets on a pike, something fundamental shifted in the human psyche. Common people had stormed a symbol of absolute power and won. The psychological barrier between ruler and ruled had been shattered forever. The revolution's early days pulsed with hope. The Declaration of the Rights of Men proclaimed that all men were born free and equal. Ancient privileges were abolished in a single night of passionate debate. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed France might transition peacefully from monarchy to constitutional government. But revolution, like avalanche, follows its own terrible logic. As economic crisis deepened and foreign armies gathered at France's borders, the moderate voices were drowned out by increasingly radical demands. The king's attempted escape to rally foreign support against his own people, stopped just miles from the border, convinced many that compromise was impossible. By 1792, France was unrecognizable. The king sat in prison, accused of treason against the nation he once ruled absolutely. But it was the execution of Louis XVI on January 21, 1793, that truly announced to the world that the old order was dead. Picture the scene: in the grey dawn of a Paris winter, the men who once claimed to rule by divine right knelt before a guillotine as thousands watched in stunned silence. With the fall of that blade, more than a king died, the very concept of sacred monarchy was executed alongside him. What followed was the Terror, and its architect was Maximilien Robespierre, a lawyer who had once opposed the death penalty. Now he spoke of virtue enforced by terror, of purifying the republic through blood. Terror is nothing other than justice, prompt, severe, inflexible, he declared, as the guillotine worked overtime. The machine became the symbol of revolutionary justice, efficient, egalitarian, democratic. It killed noble and commoner with equal speed. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian queen blamed for France's miseries, followed her husband to the scaffold 9 months later. Her final words were an apology to the executioner for accidentally stepping on his foot, a moment of grace amid the madness. But the terror consumed everything in its path. Moderate revolutionaries like Georges Danton, who dared to suggest the killing should stop, found themselves accused of counter-revolutionary sympathy. "You will follow me," Danton shouted to Robespierre as he faced his own execution. He was right. Within months, Robespierre himself was dead, victim of his own revolutionary machinery. In just over a year, 17,000 people were officially executed by the revolutionary government, but the true toll was far higher when war, civil conflict, and unofficial killings are counted. From this chaos emerged one of history's most remarkable figures. Napoleon Bonaparte was a Corsican artillery officer who seized power in 1799, promising order after a decade of revolutionary upheaval. He was 29 years old. What made Napoleon extraordinary wasn't just his military genius, though he was perhaps history's greatest general, but his ability to harness the revolution's energy while taming its chaos. He kept the revolution's promise of equality before the law while abandoning its commitment to republican government. He was a dictator who claimed to embody the people's will. The Napoleonic Code became his most lasting achievement, a legal framework that enshrined revolutionary principles of equality while establishing clear authority. It spread across Europe with his conquests, carrying revolutionary ideas even to nations that had never experienced popular uprising. But perhaps Napoleon's greatest impact was psychological. He proved that in this new world born from revolution, a man from nowhere could rise to rule an empire. The old aristocracy of birth gave way to what Napoleon called careers open to talent. Merit, not blood, would determine destiny, yet power corrupted even this child of revolution. The man who had once fought against kings crowned himself emperor, establishing a new dynasty while claiming to preserve revolutionary ideals. When he finally fell in 1815, defeated by a coalition of European monarchies, the revolution's contradictions were complete. It had begun by executing a king and ended by creating an emperor. The French Revolution didn't just change France, it changed the world forever. Its declaration that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed became the rallying cry for democratic movements across the globe. From the Latin American Wars of Independence to the 1848 revolutions across Europe, the French model inspired those seeking to overthrow established authority. But the revolution's legacy was complex and contradictory. It proclaimed universal rights while practicing systematic exclusion. Women, enslaved people, and religious minorities found that revolutionary equality had strict limits. The revolution that began with noble ideals of liberty and equality ended in imperial conquest and the glorification of military power. Yet the ideas unleashed in 1789 proved unstoppable. The notion that ordinary people could overthrow their governments, that tradition and privilege couldn't justify oppression, that human beings possessed inherent rights, these concepts spread like wildfire across continents and centuries. The revolution also revealed the terrible power of modern political movements. It showed how quickly civilization's thin veneer could be stripped away, how ordinary people could become both heroes and monsters, how noble ideals could justify horrific actions. The terror became a warning about the dangers of utopian thinking and ideological purity. Most importantly, the French Revolution demonstrated that change was possible. After 1789, no government could claim eternal legitimacy, no system could call itself unchangeable. The revolution opened the door to the modern world, for better and worse. Today, more than 2 centuries later, we still live in the shadow of those 10 turbulent years. Every time people rise against oppressive governments, every time citizens demand their rights, every time someone challenges the powerful by appealing to universal principles of human dignity, the spirit of 1789 lives again. The French Revolution reminds us that history is not inevitable, that ordinary people possess extraordinary power, and that the price of change is often higher than we imagine. It showed us both the best and worst of human nature, the soaring idealism that proclaimed all humans equal and free, and the blood-soaked reality of revolutionary justice. In the end, the French Revolution succeeded not because it solved all of France's problems, it didn't, but because it changed how we think about problems themselves. It taught the world that when people say enough, they have the power to tear down any system, no matter how ancient or powerful. The revolution's final lesson may be this: liberty, equality, and fraternity remain humanity's highest aspirations, but the path to achieving them is always more complex, more costly, and more dangerous than any generation expects. The revolution that began with such hope and ended in such bloodshed continues to challenge us with its most fundamental question: how far are we willing to go for freedom?